Welcome to our second mini lecture for week 3. In this one, we're going to spend a little bit of time on public service human resource management. Specifically, we're going to talk about selection process in public service. This chapter focuses on the processes, principles, and challenges of selecting employees in the public sector. We will explore the historical evolution of hiring, key criteria for effective selection, screening phases, and decentralized decision-making in public service hiring. Now, again, just like I said in the last one, I'm going to touch on really high-level components of this. As you go through the readings, though, you can delve deeper into each one of these different components and think about these, especially as one of your assignments coming up will be, what's the proper screening process? Think about the old concept of decentralized decision-making, and especially the whole concept of public service hiring, who we're hiring and why. So the importance of the selection process is pretty clear. It ensures fairness, transparency, and merit-based hiring. It enhances workforce quality and efficiency, and reinforces public trust in government agencies. That's a big one. In reinforcing public trust. We talk a lot about that when we talk about building and sustaining community dialogues. The selection process is one of the most crucial functions in public sector human resource management. Think about its foundation. A well-structured hiring system ensures that qualified individuals are placed in positions where they can serve the public effectively and efficiently. Fair and transparent selection processes enhance trust in government institutions and ensure compliance with merit-based hiring. Fair and transparent, how we hire, the process for hiring, critical, and is it merit-based? Do the people get selected based on their best skills and abilities? They have to have access to the system to be given an opportunity to compete, but once they compete, they need to meet the requirements of that position. There are some historical areas that we'll talk about, but I'm only going to touch upon these. They're more detailed in your reading. The 6 distinct eras of public sector hiring, from patronage systems to merit-based selection, influence of legal and social changes in hiring practices. Public sector hiring has evolved from political patronage, where jobs were granted based on political connections, to a merit-based system that prioritizes competence and fairness. Legislative reforms, civil service examination, and judicial decisions have played crucial roles in shaping modern selection methods. The criteria for effective selection comes down to a couple things. 1, it must be reliable. Reliability means consistent test results, proven consistency in how we administer and process the testing. Validity, measuring what is intended to be assessed, and fairness, or equal opportunity. And I want to talk a little bit about the whole validity thing. In the last chapter, you spent a lot of time talking about how HR looks at and develops positions, to include position studies and classification studies. What these are really guaranteed to do is to make sure that the job and the requirements align. For example, for somebody who's getting a job as an administrative assistant, to test them for their ability to run a quarter mile would have absolutely no validity because it has nothing to do with the job that's intended. It gets a little bit more challenging. We talk about testing, for example, in the law enforcement or the firefighter world. What is the reasonable measure that needs to be attained? I know for law enforcement, we do a physical test. But the physical test has to match what the expected duties and responsibilities are. Same thing with fire services. So then, of course, you have to have equal opportunity, meaning that all applicants, are given the opportunity to compete. The selection test must be designed to ensure consistency, relevance, and fairness. As I said, reliability ensures that test results are stable across different testing conditions. Validity ensures that tests accurately measure the required competency of the jobs, and you're going to hear us talk a lot about KSA's knowledge, skills, and abilities. Fairness ensures that all applicants are given an equal opportunity without bias or discrimination. The 4 screening phases, and these are pretty consistent. Certainly there'd be variants on these, but initial review and testing, interviewing and reference checks, choosing the individual for the position, negotiations about the job and are they going to accept, and then post-offer, the hiring process itself. So the hiring process occurs in 4 key stages, beginning with application review and testing to eliminate unqualified candidates. Now, you know, in your own area, especially in public safety or fire services, etc., we have a pretty comprehensive testing process that includes things well beyond this, physical abilities, but also psychological, criminal backgrounds. But all of those come back to making sure they meet the required qualifications for the job to which they're applying. The second phase involves interviews and reference checks to assess stability. Third phase includes the selection of top candidates and employment negotiations to bring them on board. In the public safety world, the employment negotiations are not usually quite the same as they are in the private, I shouldn't say private, in the other parts of the public sector. If you're hiring to be a county manager or you're hiring to come in as a treasurer, there'll probably be a fair amount of negotiations based upon your prior experience and what you bring to the table. If you're in the uniform side of the house, typically the negotiation might only come down to looking at prior experience and are you going to grant them a little bit more pay, but it's generally pretty tight because it's a merit-based system, usually with steps at the front end, a little different. Finally, the post-offer phase ensures that background checks, security clearances, and onboarding processes and procedures are completed. So the initial review and testing, screening applicants based on minimum qualifications, administering written exams to measure skills, the KSAs, filtering candidates to ensure they are qualified pool are those that we can look at. In the initial phase, applicants are screened to determine whether candidates meet those minimum qualifications. The written exams, performance assessments, or standardized tests may be used to further evaluate candidate capabilities before moving into the next phase. It's interesting when you look at some of those, the written exams, the merit exams, versus some that use performance assessments or standardized testing. All these are different from state to state and position, so it's going to be dependent upon your own particular rules and regulations. Then we get into the interviewing and reference checks. Pretty straightforward, structured versus unstructured interviews. When we talk about structured interviews, are pretty standardized. Unstructured are a little bit more conversational. Behavioral and situational interview techniques, and then checking references to validate applicants' history. As I noted, the structured interviews tend to be just that, very formal, very structured, less conversational. Behavioral interviews assess past performance, while situational interviews present hypothetical scenarios to gauge problem-solving skills. Now, a lot of agencies, especially public service agencies, rely on this particular type. Again, the challenge is finding a methodology that checks and confirms that the person has the problem solving, but at the same time, you don't want to put somebody into a police interview and drop them into the middle of a very complex situation when they've never had any skills or trainings and then say, well, how well is their problem solving? So typically you're going to try to find problem solving that is addressed through more common avenues, but still demonstrates the skill that you're trying to achieve for. And then, of course, reference checks are pretty straightforward. Verify previous employment qualifications, etc. And then we get into the choosing and negotiation part, as I mentioned earlier. Selecting top candidates based on the assessments, discussing salary, benefits, and job expectations, and ensuring alignment between the candidate and the agency needs. Once the top candidates are identified, agencies must negotiate job offers, includes salary, benefits, and work conditions. It's important to ensure that candidates' expectations align with the agency's need to facilitate a smooth transition in the role. Can't stress how important this is. Over my career, the people that we hired that didn't necessarily have a realistic expectation about what the job entailed. Now, the great thing about this is most agencies have probationary period, and that is the golden time to assess whether this is really the role that person expected, and do they meet the expected needs of the agency. Then we get into the post-offer and hiring issues. Those background checks and security clearances, the physical and psychologicals when needed, the onboarding and training programs. In our case, generally revolves around an academy and then field training. Even after an extended additional verification such as criminal background checks, security clearances, and medical evaluations may be required, doesn't mean it's a perfect candidate. Once cleared, new hires go through onboarding and training programs to acclimate them to their roles, duties, and responsibilities. So think about this when we get into the idea of decentralized decision-making in that selection process that we've just gone through. It's a shift from a civilized civil service hiring. It provides greater flexibilities for the agencies in balancing consistency with agency-specific needs. So many public agencies have removed or moved away from centralized hiring models, allowing for greater flexibility in the process. While decentralization gives agencies greater autonomy in their hiring process, it must be balanced with standardized hiring practices to maintain fairness and competence. I'm going to think about specifically Arlington in this case, but it could go anywhere. If it was a centralized hiring in Arlington County, all the hiring would come out of the Department of Human Resources and the HR, but they divest themselves of that and allow the police department and the fire department and emergency management planning to hire their own people, but they work very closely with central HR to make sure that the practices that they use, the hiring methodologies, the interview questions, and all those components meet all the legal requirements that the Human Resources Agency is going to demand. My recommendation on this all the time is whenever you create or move through any process that isn't handled directly through HR, that you work directly with an HR representative who will work with you to make sure that the tests that you give, the processes that you use, every step of the way will meet any legal challenges that may come back to human resources that might suggest that there's a bias in the process, or it's disparate treatment for some, or that the test doesn't measure accurately the skills necessary to do the job. All those things can be avoided if you work really closely with HR through the entire process. So what are some of the key takeaways for this mini lecture? Well, this is a relatively straightforward process, right? The selection process is definitely crucial for HR or human resource management. We talk a little bit about the historical shapes that have changed to modern hiring. What I would suggest to you, while you can look at the book and talk about the historical periods, really focus on the period we're in now and what's going on when it comes down to modern HR practices and expectations. Reliable and valid tests ensure fairness and equality, and decentralization does allow for more agency control in their hiring. Just stay close to your HR in the process. So the complexity of the public sector hiring, selection methods must be legally compliant, fair, and effective in choosing the right person. Understanding the trends, testing criteria, and balance between flexibility and consistency helps shape a better hiring process. So lastly, some questions to consider as we move into the live session. How can agencies balance decentralization with fairness in hiring? What roles do structured interviews play in reducing bias? How has technology change the selection process in public service? That's a big one. These discussion questions encourage some critical thinking in the HR realm. So it also raises some questions about decentralization and fairness, and the role of technology in hiring and how it affects the applicant processing. Think about what has changed. I mean, especially when you think about AI assisted assessments. Wow. So we'll bring these to the floor for discussion in our live session. And I want to thank each and every one of you for paying attention and being involved in this one. Take care.